She hadn't been sleeping well, and the first time she noticed what was happening in her neighbor's garden, she told herself it was just insomnia. There was nothing unusual about her neighbor having a garden. Plenty of people on the block did. Raised beds, tidy rows, herbs in labeled pots. Normal things that filled the daylight hours with quiet, harmless routines. But he didn't garden during the day. It was only at night that he came outside. She saw him first from her bedroom window past midnight. The yard was lit by a single, low lantern, and he moved slowly between them, kneeling, standing, kneeling again, his hands buried in the dirt like he was searching for something he'd lost. At first, she thought he was just meticulous. Maybe he worked late. Maybe this was the only time he had. Then she noticed he murmured, as if talking to someone. Night after night, she found herself drawn back to the window, watching her neighbor garden at night. 3 days later, she woke up to a soft, irregular tap against her window. For a moment, she thought it was a branch caught in the wind, scraping the side of the house. The tapping came again, and she turned her head slowly toward the window to see a rose pressed against the glass. But this wasn't any ordinary rose. Yes, it had a long, single stem, its petal in full bloom. Her breath caught somewhere in her throat as she pushed herself up in bed. She tried to make sense of what she saw, how something rooted in the ground could be at her window. She watched the stem bend forward and the boom tilt slightly, as if looking at her with invisible eyes. A voice, thin and brittle, threading itself through her thoughts like something pushing through soil. "He's killing us." She flinched, and the room went silent again. "Hello?" "He's killing us." She swallowed. "No," she whispered, the word shaky, automatic. "No, that's not. He cuts us down before we bloom. He buries what's left. We don't get to open. We don't get to live long enough." Her hands clenched the sheets. "This isn't real." The rose tapped again. "Help me. Help us. Please." She squeezed her eyes shut, but it didn't matter, because when she reopened them, the rose was still there. "Please," it said again, before leaving. She couldn't sleep after that. Morning came. The garden was still, and the rows of rose bushes was neatly spaced. It had to be lack of sleep, she thought to herself. Perhaps an overactive imagination. She forced herself to those conclusions until night fell again and the rose came back. "Help us," it said again. Her stomach twisted. I don't know how." The rose turned. "See what he does." As if on cue, the lantern flickered to life in the yard below. Her neighbor stepped into the light and walked over to the bushes. He knelt, whispered something too low for her to hear, and he pulled out a pair of shears. "Watch," the rose whispered to her, and she watched as he snipped one. He dropped it directly in the soil and covered it back before returning to the next one. "Every night," the rose said, "every night we grow, and he cuts. We grow again, and he cuts again." "That's just pruning," she replied. "Then why don't we come back the same?" the rose questioned her. She watched him move to the next bush. The shears opened, he cut, and another fell to the dirt. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Dig." The rose paused for a moment before replying. Stop him. The following evening, she didn't sleep. Instead, she waited in the kitchen for her neighbor to appear. She felt that it was ridiculous. There was no such thing as a talking rose, but it did talk. The neighbor was doing what every avid gardener did. He tended to his roses. He pruned them. She waited for hours, and right before she gave up, she saw him step out from his home. She watched in silence as he made his way to the rose bush. He knelt, and this time she heard him speak. He was saying the same name over and over and over. He then cut a few roses, buried them, and headed back inside. She exited her home, taking slow footsteps as she made her way to the garden. She knelt near the rose bush, remembering what the rose told her the night before. She began to dig. "This is stupid," she whispered. The soil was warm between her fingers, and she felt something solid. It wasn't a root or a stone. She dug further and revealed something she never saw before. It was like any rose she'd ever seen. It was thicker, almost wax-like in texture. It had a deep, unnatural red that seemed to absorb the lantern light instead of reflecting it. "What do you see?" She heard the neighbor's voice behind her. She jumped to her feet and spun around to face him. "Oh, hi. I'm sorry. Don't be," he smiled. I've seen you here at night." He nodded. "I know. You watch me from your room." He pointed her bedroom window. "I was wondering when you'd come out here." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you." "Oh, don't worry. It's okay." He returned his attention back to the bush. "I like gardening at night. Can't slack on pruning, you know." Her gaze followed his, and she thought she saw the petal twitch. "I'm assuming you hear them?" he asked. "Your mom told me you can hear my garden talk." She shook her head immediately. "No, I don't know what you're talking about." His gaze held hers for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Good," he replied. "I would have to tell your mother if you did." He turned back to the garden as if the conversation was over and reached for his shears. "Tell her what?" He didn't reply. Instead, he headed to another bush, clipped a few more roses before heading back inside. She remained rooted where she stood for a few moments longer, confused yet intrigued, before heading back inside to her bedroom. While she sat on her bed, she watched the neighbor return to prune a few more bushes. This time she heard the muffled cries, and for a second she thought she saw the same rose who visited her, feet away, hiding behind a small tomato plant. She felt they locked eyes, even though it had no eyes of its own, and when she blinked, it was gone. Or maybe it had never been there at all. The orange bottle of risperidone still sat untouched on her nightstand. 3 nights, still full.